Girl who looks so pretty tonight, like it always did. Yeah, like the Spanish city to me when we were kids.
Dire Straits were a pretty well-known British rock band who existed from 1977 to 1988 and then again from 1990 to 1995. They were centred around Mark Knopfler, who was their guitarist and singer and songwriter, who came from the northeast of England. They had lots of success with 6 studio albums. Their album Brothers in Arms has been an absolute huge seller worldwide and is credited with being the reason that many people bought their first CD players. It was the first album to be entirely digitally recorded. Hi, my name's Dan. So most of this channel is of me doing reviews of albums, but I'm using a list that was created by a website called Acclaimed Music of according to them, the 3,000 greatest albums of all time. Actually, not according to them, because it's an amalgamated list from many other lists from critics, and all they've done is compile it, a bit like a longer-term version of Metacritic, if you know what that is. But occasionally I step off that list and do something off the list. And one of the series that I'm doing is a series called Criminally Missing. And the point of this is that these are albums that I think are pretty well known, but don't appear in this list of the 3,000 greatest albums of all time. And I think they really should. So obviously this is going to be an album that I really like, and this is one of those albums that I'm reviewing. So this is a live double album by Dire Straits. It's 2 vinyl albums or 2 CDs, and I listened to the CD version because that's the version that I happen to have myself. And of course, I love it. But let's try and do some description, and try and tell you why I love it, or what's going on here. So it's I don't really know if there's a good term for this kind of genre of music that was around in the early 80s and kind of went through maybe to the late 80s as well. But it was I always think the term adult oriented or album oriented rock, either of those are good with me. And I feel that this is music that appealed to people who were listening to the charts and singles in the 70s, but then grew up into the 80s. Basically, exactly my generation of people who then started getting albums and getting into people who were they felt were musically strong. It was kind of pop rock generally. And in here, I would put people like Sting and the Police and Dire Straits and Tina Turner. And quite a few other people actually as well in this kind of bracket. I would say that Dire Straits is kind of. I don't want to look down my nose at pub rock, but I think they're slightly too sophisticated for pub rock. They're too poppy to be called prog rock, although that label has been used on them. And I think that they're not kind of weird enough to be art rock either. I think the closest that I can get is Heartland rock, which seems to be a description that applies mostly to American bands and particularly strongly to Bruce Springsteen. And in terms of the subject matter, they're quite similar to the sort of thing that Bruce might have done. So they're kind of the UK equivalent. But I would say that the other thing that's distinctive about them is that they're very invested in the music as well as the words, and the music's not just a vehicle for the words. The words aren't just a decoration on afterwards. It's a lot of it is about the music and enjoying the music. So there are long instrumental passages here. There are long instrumental passages in the songs on the albums, and the original recordings, but sometimes they're even longer in this, as they're just getting into a bit of playing music and enjoying it. And it's fairly obvious that the crowd are enjoying that too. So I'm going to pull out some tracks that are my favourites on this album. Telegraph Road and Private Investigations. They were both from Love Over Gold album. Romeo and Juliet and Sultans of Swing, which are a little bit older, both great tracks. And I'm going to also pull out Tunnel of Love, which is a track because it refers to a place called the Spanish City, and it talks about um, going and like the Spanish City to me is what the line is, and the Spanish City is not a place in Spain. It was many years ago now a permanent fun fair in Whitley Bay. And in my 20s, I used to go out on a summer's evening out on the metro out to the coast and go and play on the rides on the in the Spanish City. I was kind of around its decline towards the end of its time. But it's the references of stuff in the Internal of Love are things that are from my past in some ways. It has a brief mention of Cullercoats and Whitley Bay, which are two of the coastal towns just east of Newcastle. Right, back to the music. So musically, there are some passages where they're basically using big, wide space things and adding little twiddles. I think some of the best stuff for that is some of the introductions, as they kind of don't before they've got into a groove, they're doing something kind of soundscapey. And then when they get into grooves, they're often grooves of fairly repetitive, the same series of chords over and over again. And usually that's then a vehicle for Mark to be playing his guitar over it. So let's talk about the guitar playing. This is distinctive Dire Straits guitar. And it's fairly clean sound, but it's got quite a percussive sound. So the way that it's played is not legato. It's kind of is all the little edges of the sounds. And he's a great player. I have to say, I do like his electric guitar playing. He does play some other kinds of guitar in here. So the Private Investigations has got a classical guitar that features in it. And Romeo and Juliet has a resophonic guitar. So this might confuse some people. If you know they're slightly later than this album, Brothers in Arms, and the cover for it, it's got this guitar on the front, which has kind of a metal bit in it. In fact, I think the one that they've got on there is fully metal over the front. And this is a kind of guitar that's sometimes called a dobro or a national guitar. Paul Simon refers to a national guitar in one of his songs on Graceland. Both of those are brand names, and the general term for this is a resophonic guitar. And what it has is it has a metal diaphragm inside which resonates, which is attached to, I think, attached to the bridge, and it has a very distinctive sound. And if you want to know what that distinctive sound is, listen to Romeo and Juliet and that slightly weird guitar sound that they're using. Where am I going? Right, let's pull back a bit. Let's talk about the singing. So this is Mark Knopfler singing as well, and sometimes he has been accused of not really singing, but more kind of mumbling and grunting. And I think that's sometimes a reasonable distinction. Description. I think he does sing, and he can sing in tune, but he's got a voice that has got this really kind of gravelly and mumbly quality to it, a bit like Bob Dylan in some ways, I would say. Not quite the same, and certainly not as nasal. Um, but he uses it well, and it's very, very distinctive, and it's quite expressive when he chooses to be. The songwriting is, I have to say, there's so many things to love on this album. The songwriting is superb, not just musically, but also lyrically. In terms of lyrically writing, my favourite track is Romeo and Juliet, which is about a love that's faded, and it's kind of basically saying, you used to be really in love with me, you used to be completely, and now you just say, Romeo, I used to have a thing with him, and it's about this kind of relationship that's faded and gone. But it's really nicely evoked through the words. Love Over Gold, the track apparently is reputedly about tensions with his brother, David Knopfler, over the direction the band should go. David had left the band before this, and they'd had tensions over whether they were going to become commercial, be more commercial or more focused on loving the music. again, that's reputedly, so I'm not putting that forward as fact, just as something that I've heard. Everything's nicely put together. It's crisply recorded. There's a good amount of crowd in here, but it doesn't kind of take over and swamp things. The songs, some of the songs I would say feel even stronger in this than they do on the original studio recordings. Um, uh, they're obviously enjoying themselves playing, which is great to hear and come through. As I said, they've extended some of the instrumental passages even further. And the pace for the album it just goes really nicely. It moves between different kind of feels well. It's ordered well. If anything, it feels a little bit short, despite it being a double album. So I'm going to say, if you hate Dire Straits, you will hate this because it is Dire Straits almost in their purest form. I love them, and I think this is kind of them at some of their best stuff that they've done. I know they went on to do the Brothers in Arms album, and a lot of people will love that. Um, to me, this is a stronger album, I think, even than Brothers in Arms. Right, as always at this point, I'd like to invite you to tell me what you think of this album. Now, I know that for some people, if you're the right generation, similar to me, it may be that either you absolutely hate them or you have a huge love for this album. I know a lot of people who really do love this album. And that's it from me for now.
So your love struck Romeo, he's got your straight serenade, laying everybody low with a love song that he made. And he finds his street light and he steps out of the shade. He says something like,